Today I want to cover one of the biggest mistakes that new candle makers make with their supplies. And it's extremely understandable because I did it too when I first started out many years ago. And it's this: measuring supplies by volume. Ugh. It's the worst thing you can do. It's going to screw you up. And today I'm going to give you 5 different reasons why we measure by weight and not by volume. Let's get started. Welcome back to Armatage Candle Company, the premier online resource for accelerating your candle making technique and business. We're going to cover why we always measure by weight versus volume. But first, let's talk about what weight versus volume is in terms of the units, because it can be a little confusing. First, there's 2 different sets of units. There's imperial units, like the ones that I use here in the great United States of America, and then there's the English units, the metric system that's used across the pond or in a lot of other areas of the world, honestly. So let's start with imperial. Imperial weight is going to be measured in pounds and ounces. Don't be confused by fluid ounces, which are different than ounces. A fluid ounce is a unit of space, of volume, right? It takes how much volume can something take up. That's a 3-dimensional characteristic versus ounce, not fluid ounce. Ounce is going to be how much something weighs, 16 ounces in a pound. So when we buy wax, you're going to buy that in pounds. And when you measure it out, you typically measure it in ounces. And on the metric side of things, you're going to be measuring things in kilograms and grams. Don't get confused by the existence of milliliters. And honestly, some things are sold in milliliters. That's a little bit confusing. But when we measure it for candles, we always measure in weight, which would be the grams. Let's start with the first reason. Wax is sold by weight. That's not a reason by itself to always measure things out by weight, but it's a lot easier when you're comparing the weight of what you're buying versus the weight of what you need for your products. So if your product specification is listed in terms of ounces or grams, that's not too hard, apples to apples, to figure out how much wax do I need to buy, or how often do I resupply, or how long will this 45 pounds of wax actually last me. Go to any supplier's website and I dare you to find me a supplier who's selling their wax by volume. If you find it, great, but it's super uncommon, right? They're going to ship by weight, they're going to sell by weight, you're going to buy by weight, you're going to measure by weight, weight. It's all the same language. Let's hop to the next reason. Fragrance oil is also sold by weight. Again, not a reason exclusively to measure everything by weight, but the fact that fragrance is sold by weight is kind of like wax, right? It's the same units, it's easier to measure. But more specifically, fragrance oils usually have a wide variety of densities. And this is how much space does that particular weight take up. Like a really dense, you think of something like steel is super dense versus a cotton ball, not dense at all. This is a lot easier to see when you compare 2 bottles of fragrance oil, because they might weigh the exact same amount, but they're filled to a different level. So 16 ounces and 16 ounces, but one might have less fragrance oil in it and the other one has more. You're not getting duped by marketing. That's just how densities work. If you measured by volume for fragrance oil, you would have to do some sort of really strange math to figure out how much fragrance oil you need versus just weighing it out, because of reason number 3. Wax specifications are based on weight. Weight is the universal language of how much fragrance oil wax can hold. For example, if you have a wax that can hold 12% fragrance oil, it means 12% by its own weight. So if you have 100 grams of that wax, you could hold up to 12% of its weight, 12 grams, 100 grams, 12% of that's 12 grams, 12 grams of fragrance oil. If it was some sort of weird volume conversion thing, you'd have to go through and calculate the density for literally every single fragrance oil to figure out how much weight of that fragrance oil you would need to use with that wax. Fortunately, because we measure by weight for wax and we measure by weight for fragrance oil, the language, the specifications, they all play together, and you don't have to do anything super crazy to figure out how much fragrance oil you need for that 12% loaded candle. If the candle math part is confusing, we made a whole video, which I'll put in the link below, but it's also a good time to shout out the sponsor of this video, Moonlight. Moonlight is a candle making production software. It automates all of the design, batch, and inventory of your production process. So if you're trying to figure out how much weight you need, Moonlight lets you just set what % fragrance load you want to set, and it takes care of all the math for you. Moonlight makes it exceptionally easy to organize your candle business, to spend less time on the paperwork and the math and more time pouring candles selling them, giving them away to friends, whatever you do with them. The next reason we measure by weight is it's super easy to measure by weight versus volume. If we had to measure volume, that's insanely difficult. For liquids, it's kind of easy, right? You get these beakers and they tell you what the volume is when you fill it to that certain level. But with wax, especially with things like flakes and not, nice blocks that paraffin comes in, trying to figure out the volume of that is going to be exceptionally hard. Remember, volume, if it's a perfect cube, is length by width by height. But when you're filling a pour pot or a container and you're trying to measure out these supplies, volume is going to be incredibly overwhelming to try to figure out how much you need. Fortunately, we measure by weight, which means you put it in a container, you weigh the container, and that's exactly how much you need. Okay, and the last reason we measure by weight affects not only candle makers, but also candle suppliers, and it relates to shipping. When we talk about freight, when you're putting something in the mail, it's almost always going to matter how much that package weighs. So when we measure by weight, not only are you required to put it on the label of your candle, but if you're sending that candle somewhere, you're going to want to know the weight of that finished product. So measuring by weight is just the common language throughout. From buying supplies to shipping those candles and getting in the hands of customers, weight is the universal language of candle making measurement. Anyways, that's all I have for you. I hope some of that was helpful, useful, or insightful. Let me know if you have any questions below, and I'll see you in the next one.